Chapter 1. The world was a cold, unforgiving architecture of black marble and perpetual twilight, and its weight rested like a physical slab of granite upon the stooped, weary shoulders of the man they had once called the first Scion. Now he was merely Kale, a shadow among the nameless, draped in threadbare wool that couldn't disguise the inhuman, marble-smooth perfection of the skin beneath. His long coat was a borrowed shroud, and the chill, a persistent gnawing ache that had nothing to do with temperature, but everything to do with the self-inflicted exile of his existence. For 4 centuries, he had walked the periphery of mortal society, driven by a profound, agonizing guilt that was the true, eternal frost of his being. The city of Ethelmorn, with its skeletal Gothic spires and rain-slicked cobblestones, seemed to exhale a melancholic breath that mirrored his own. Tonight, the sky wept a cold, relentless drizzle, a curtain of liquid despair that muffled the scant, lonely sounds of the midnight street. Kyle stood beneath the minimal shelter of a decaying archway, his eyes, ancient, silver-flecked obsidian, fixed on nothing, yet seeing everything. The sensory overload of a world he no longer truly belonged to was a constant thrum beneath his unnaturally silent, still exterior. The metallic tang of rainwater on rusted iron, the faint chemical scent of a gas lamp struggling against the mist, and, most acutely, the distant, frantic rhythm of a fragile human heart beating too fast. He hadn't fed in 3 weeks, a self-imposed penance that left his body taut and humming with a controlled, agonizing hunger. He desired oblivion more than sustenance, but his oath, an ancient, self-imposed covenant to remember and protect, was a chain forged in his own deepest sorrow. The rhythmic drip of the rain was broken by a sound that tore through the quiet melancholy. A thin, reedy sob, choked and desperate, followed by the patter of small running feet. Kyle, who had perfected the art of stillness over centuries, shifted his focus, his inhuman senses instantly locking onto the source. Rounding the corner of a narrow alleyway, a girl, no older than 7, small for her age, her thin cotton dress plastered to her frame by the rain, stumbled into the main thoroughfare. Her face, streaked with tears and rain, was a mask of raw terror. She was utterly alone, save for the massive, ornate silver locket clutched in her small hand, which seemed impossibly heavy. He knew, with the cold, absolute certainty of an immortal who had witnessed the unraveling of countless lives, that she was in immediate, profound danger. A hunter, perhaps, or worse, one of his own kind, driven mad by the thinning veil between the worlds and the seductive scent of innocence. The child paused, shivering violently, utterly lost, the silver of her locket flashing weakly in the meager light. Her small, broken cry pierced the quiet, a sound so utterly vulnerable it struck Kyle's guilt-ridden core like a physical blow. The crushing burden of his past failures, the ones he couldn't protect, the ones he was forced to abandon, flared into a white-hot spark of furious resolve. He couldn't save them all, but he could save her. Not as the first Scion, not as a king, but as a silent, anonymous guardian in the rain. Before the thought was fully formed, his body moved with the liquid, unnatural speed of his kind, a blur of dark wool against the gray stone. He closed the distance in a single, soundless glide, his tall, imposing frame suddenly looming over the small girl. His tone, when he spoke, was a low, formal baritone, stripped of all supernatural resonance, yet carrying an immense, quiet authority that transcended language. "Child," he said, his voice a profound contrast to the chaos of the storm, "do not move. You are safe. Look at me." The girl flinched, her eyes wide pools of deep emerald, gazing up at his face, a face that carried the sculpted, terrifying beauty of a forgotten statue, unmarred by time, yet shadowed by an endless sorrow. But her terror was not directed at him. She was simply irrevocably broken. Kale's senses flared again. The danger was closer than he thought. He didn't hesitate. He stripped the long, thick, expensive overcoat from his shoulders, and despite the violent, ancient instinct to remain untouchable, he gently, yet firmly, knelt and draped the heavy wool around her small body. The warmth was immediate and enveloping. He shielded her completely, his body a solid, immovable wall between her and the direction from which she had come, his focus now solely on the shivering girl, his own existence momentarily forgotten. He felt the cold seeping into his own fine linen shirt, a mundane sensation that grounded him in the present, away from the 1,000 years of regret. She buried her face in the rough wool of his coat, the thin sobs finally beginning to quiet. The scent of her, clean linen, damp earth, and the unique, crystalline trace of something ancient and other beneath the fear was a dangerous lure, a counterpoint to his hunger, yet his iron will held. He was a shield, nothing more. He felt the subtle shift in the air, the faint, almost imperceptible displacement of the shadows in the mouth of the alley. Something was watching, something powerful. His blood, that slow-moving, potent venom, began to sing a cold, low note of warning. But the girl was protected. His heart, or what passed for it, remained fiercely, terrifyingly still. Chapter 2. The silent, tense communion beneath the leaking archway stretched, measured only by the monotonous beat of the falling rain. Kyle felt the child's small, fragile body gradually relax against the unfamiliar, solid structure of his own. Her shivering lessened, the sound of her breath evening out into shallow, tired gasps. The emerald eyes, now merely damp, not hysterical, peered up at him, studying the unreadable, angular planes of his face with an unnerving, almost prophetic intensity. The silver locket, now slightly ajar, revealed a tiny, perfectly rendered obsidian carving of a single winged anchor, a sigil Kyle recognized with a sudden, violent spasm of remembrance. It was the mark of the Veleta, the hidden line of mortal oracles bound to the ancient, forgotten pacts of the first houses, the very covenants he himself had helped forge and, ultimately, shattered. The immense weight of 4 centuries of guilt pressed down on him with crushing force. This child was not just a human, she was the link, the vulnerable hinge of a history he had desperately tried to outrun. His self-imposed exile, his penance, had been a futile exercise. The past had sought him out, cloaked in the simple, desperate figure of a frightened, lonely girl. "What is your name, little light?" Kyle asked, his voice softer this time, carrying a low, soothing vibration that was almost musical. He spoke in the old tongue, the formal, precise dialect of the High Coven, a language reserved for oaths and eternal declarations. The child startled, her eyes widening again, not in fear, but in recognition. Her response was a mere whisper, yet it held the immensity of a secret whispered into the ear of the void. "Lyra, my father, he told me only to say the word, anchor." The word, anchor, was spoken with the perfect formal pronunciation of someone who had been rigorously and recently trained. It was the activation key, the ultimate declaration of trust in the protection of the vampire scions, a trust that was terrifyingly undeserved. Kale's internal landscape, usually a frozen wasteland of control, threatened to crack. He had sworn never to be an anchor again, never to be the root of a promise he might break. Yet here she was, the promise personified. The scent he had noticed before, that crystalline otherness, suddenly sharpened, a fleeting aroma of pure, unrefined ether, the magical essence of the earth thrumming beneath her skin. This child wasn't just of the Veleta, she was imbued. She was the focus point, the eye of the storm gathering around them. As this realization solidified, a deep, resonant thrum echoed from the mouth of the alley, a sound that bypassed the ear and vibrated directly in Kyle's ancient, undead bones. The shadows coalesced, twisting the air into a thick, palpable darkness that swallowed the weak gaslight. A figure emerged, tall and impossibly thin, draped in garments woven from what appeared to be dried ash and grave cloth. It was a creature of the Noctruge, the ancient enemies of the first houses, beings of pure, devouring darkness that fed not on blood, but on conviction and faith. The creature's head was a smooth, unsettling void, save for 2 points of cold, spectral blue fire that burned with malignant intelligence. "The Veleta," the thing hissed, its voice like the grinding of dry shale. "The vessel is found. The oath is broken, Kyle. Your eternal failure is mine to consume." Kyle's stillness vanished. The shift in his posture was minimal, a slight tensing of his shoulders, a lowering of his chin, yet it transformed him instantly from a melancholy, guilt-ridden recluse into a creature of terrifying, elegant, lethal force. His eyes did not just reflect the blue fire, they absorbed it, burning with the cold, self-contained inferno of 1,000 battles. The temperature around him dropped instantly, not with the natural chill of the night, but with the unnatural soul-deep cold of raw, vampiric power being marshaled. He settled Lyra firmly behind him, his hand a vice on her small shoulder, ensuring her safety with the absolute, non-negotiable certainty of a celestial body protecting its satellite. "The oath," Kyle replied, his voice a low, hard rumble that seemed to press the very air out of the alley, "is not broken, creature. It is reaffirmed. You will not touch her." The tension was agonizing, a taut string ready to snap into violence. The Noctruge, a master of psychological warfare, sneered, its spectral eyes flicking to the frightened girl hidden by Kyle's enormous frame. "And what price, little king, for this fleeting mercy? Will you pay in blood, or will you pay in time, the very currency of your unending suffering?" Kyle didn't answer with words. The only appropriate response to the creature's ancient taunt was the language of power. He let his control slip just enough. The air crackled. The cobblestones at his feet frosted instantly, and a cold, silver light, drawn from the deepest well of his immortal core, began to emanate from his hands, pooling into a shield of shimmering, protective intent that utterly enveloped the girl, and, incidentally, his own self-loathing. His purpose was singular, overwhelming. He was the anchor. He would not fail again. Chapter 3. The air was no longer merely cold. It was arctic, a pressurized, humming vessel of latent power contained by Kyle's centuries of disciplined control. The silver light, the signature of the first house's protective magic, a cold, defensive, etheric shield designed to repel the shadow fire of the Noctruge, pulsed gently around Lyra. Hidden behind his protective mass, the girl was utterly silent, her breath coming in shallow, quick bursts, but she did not cry again. She held the silver obsidian locket tight, a tiny, frail beacon of the conviction the enemy sought to destroy. The Noctruge, an entity named Markal, hissed in palpable annoyance, its shadow form rippling like smoke in a forced draft. The protective aura felt like holy fire to its inherently negative nature. A shield of purity, Kyle? How tragically ironic. You, the architect of the great betrayal, shielding innocence with the very power you forswore. Markal advanced a single, gliding step, its skeletal hands extending, not to strike, but to absorb the very light from the street lamps, plunging the immediate area into an absolute light-devouring abyss. Only Kyle's silver shield and the spectral blue of Markal's eyes remained visible, two opposing, warring sources of light in a universe of sudden, absolute darkness. Kyle felt the ancient, familiar pull, the psychic attempt to burrow into his mind, to find the weak point, the raw, unhealed wound of his eternal guilt. He let the creature in, not because he was weak, but because he was stone. He had lived with that guilt for so long, it was no longer a wound, but the very foundation of his soul. The creature found only granite and a profound, agonizing sorrow that was utterly impenetrable. I forswore politics, creature, Kyle stated, his voice calm, yet resonating with a terrifying, contained violence. I did not forswear mercy. Step back from the child and consider the cost of drawing the attention of the Blood King's true power. He used the ancient, formal title, not out of pride, but as a tactical declaration. He was no longer the wandering recluse. He was the scion, and this child was now under the protection of the entirety of the fractured First Covenant. The implied threat, the unleashing of a power so immense it could crack the very foundation of the city, was enough to make even the Nokdruj hesitate. Markal recoiled slightly, the blue fire in its eyes flickering. The creature knew Kael's true, unbridled power, a power that had laid waste to armies in a forgotten age. Yet the reward was too great, the prophecy of the Veleda too critical to their long war. You cannot save her and yourself, Kyle. The ritual requires two anchors, the light and the vessel of the ancient blood. You choose your damnation. The words were designed to plant doubt, to exploit the core of Kael's internal conflict. But Lyra, the silent, observing child, chose that moment to act. She reached a small, trembling hand from beneath the protection of the greatcoat and touched Kael's wrist, the smooth, unnaturally cold, marble-like skin. Her touch was not a plea, but a declaration. The faint, crystalline trace of ether that Kael had sensed earlier surged, a warm, vibrant flood of pure energy that bypassed his skin and went directly into his corpus mortis, his undead heart. The effect was instantaneous and staggering. It was not a magical attack, but a radical empowerment. The crushing fatigue of his self-imposed starvation vanished. His blood, potent and poisonous, began to move with a renewed, furious intensity. The silver light around them didn't just brighten, it became a white, roaring flame, utterly consuming the darkness the Nokdruj had conjured. This was the true nature of the Veleda. They did not wield power, they anchored and magnified the power of their chosen protector. Kyle had been a depleted vessel, fueled only by centuries of guilt. Lyra was the spark that ignited the bonfire. I choose her, Kyle snarled, the sound a low, predatory growl that was finally, truly awake. He moved with the amplified, terrifying speed that only the oldest of his kind could muster. He didn't use a subtle spell or a complex strike. He used the raw, devastating simplicity of his own physical power. He reached out and seized Markal. The creature screamed, a sound of dry, ripping fabric and pure psychic pain, as Kael's hand, a solid white gauntlet of power, closed around its smoky, ashen throat. The silver light burned like acid into the shadow form, tearing it apart at the molecular level. Kyle's face, only inches from the creature's spectral eyes, was terrifyingly devoid of mercy. Return to the void, little shadow. The anchor of the Veleda is bound. With a single, explosive effort, Kyle didn't just release the creature. He threw the dissolving shadow mass into the nearest stone wall. The impact was phenomenal. The cobblestones cracked, and the ancient stone of the alley wall crumbled into dust, the force dissipating Marshall completely, leaving behind only the acrid, telltale scent of ash and ozone. He stood over the newly created ruin, his chest heaving once with a breath he didn't need, the power slowly receding, leaving only the profound cold and the sound of the rain. The entire brutal confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. Kyle turned immediately, sinking down again beside the silent Lyra. He was not a king, he was not a savior, he was simply a man bound by an oath. The battle was won, but the war, he knew, had only just begun. Chapter 4. The sudden, brutal silence that followed the dissipation of Markal was heavy, broken only by the tireless, relentless drumming of the rain. The white, violent light receded completely, leaving the alley once more to the melancholic glow of the single, sputtering gas lamp. Kyle, physically intact but mentally drained by the necessary display of raw, unrestrained power, settled back onto his heels, his focus entirely on Lyra. The girl, despite witnessing a feat of supernatural combat that would have shattered the mind of an adult, looked at him with an unnerving mixture of exhausted vulnerability and profound, ancient trust. Her eyes, still wide and luminous, held no fear of him, only the lingering echo of the danger that had just passed. She still gripped his wrist, her small hand a fragile yet immensely powerful connection. That touch, the transfer of etheric energy that had so radically empowered him, had done more than just boost his strength. It had, for the first time in centuries, momentarily dissolved the frozen wall of his own loneliness. He felt connected, not just by duty, but by a shared, vital spark. "You are safe now, Lyra," Kyle murmured, once again in the low, intimate baritone of the old tongue. He gently loosened her grip on his wrist, not in rejection, but in the necessity of securing their retreat. He needed to move her to the absolute safety of his domain, a place shielded by centuries of ancient wards, his ancestral manor, Ethel Morn's heart, a fortress disguised as a decaying Gothic ruin on the city's outskirts. "The creature is gone, but others will follow. We must leave this place." Lyra finally spoke, her voice thin but steady. "He said you broke an oath. He called you a king." She didn't pose it as an accusation, but as a simple, direct request for truth. Her honesty, the stark simplicity of her observation, cut through the layers of Kyle's carefully constructed self-deception. He sighed, a slow, unnecessary expulsion of air that was pure, profound exhaustion. "The creatures of the void speak only in lies and half-truths, little light. I was a king once in a world that crumbled into dust, and the oath, it was not broken by my hand, but by a choice I made long ago, a choice of mercy over war. It is a burden I carry, a debt that can only be repaid by protecting the next generation of the Veleta." His explanation was sparse, purposeful, and honest, revealing more of his internal world than he had allowed any living being to glimpse in 400 years. He rose to his full, formidable height, pulling the still shivering Lyra up with him. He adjusted the large, heavy coat around her, ensuring she was completely enveloped in its warmth and the faint, cold iron scent of his own power. He looked down at the silver locket with the winged anchor, the object of such high-stakes confrontation. "This locket is your shield, Lyra, and I am your anchor. For now, that is all you need to know." He scooped her into his arms, easily and effortlessly, her weight negligible in his powerful grasp. She was feather-light, yet she carried the weight of the ancient world. She settled against his chest, her head resting just over his heart, which, of course, did not beat. But she felt the immense, comforting stillness of his body, the unwavering solidity of his unnatural form. Kyle moved out of the alley, melting back into the shadows and the constant obfuscating curtain of the rain. His destination was the manor, a journey that would take them through the winding, forgotten backstreets of Ethel Morn, avoiding all human and supernatural observation. His mind was already turning, cold and precise, like the gearwork of a master clock. He needed to find the remainder of the Veleta line to understand the specifics of the current prophecy and, most urgently, to prepare the manor's wards for a high-stakes siege. Markal's appearance meant the Noctrouge were acting not in isolation, but as a coordinated force. They knew the child was vital. They knew where to look. They were hunting the last hope of the first houses, and Kyle, the self-exiled Blood King, was now their only, flawed, fiercely protective barrier. As he glided through the deserted, rain-slicked street, Lyra stirred, her eyes closed in deep exhaustion. Her voice was a barely audible sigh against his linen shirt. "My father, He said the anchor would be beautiful and lonely. He said he would smell like cold marble and rain. Kyle stopped, his immense frame utterly still, a shadow carved from the surrounding darkness. The description, poetic, melancholy, and unnervingly accurate, was an intimate glimpse into the mind of the man who had prepared the child for this moment. He knew. Lyra's father, wherever he was, had possessed a deep, terrifying insight into Cale's essential, lonely nature. Cale held the girl tighter, the act of physical contact now a necessity, not an indulgence. The prophecy, the oath, the burden, it was all now focused onto this small, vulnerable, yet powerful life held safe in his arms. He pressed on, moving faster, the ancient, haunted halls of his manor now calling to him not as a tomb, but as a necessary sanctuary. Chapter 5. The ancestral manor, Ethel Morn's heart, rose before them like a vast petrified skeleton against the bruised pre-dawn sky. It was a masterpiece of crumbling Gothic architecture, all sharp angles, broken spires, and immense leaded windows that watched the world with sightless, dust-streaked eyes. To a mortal, it was an intimidating, dilapidated ruin. To Cale, it was the only true sanctuary left, a fortress intricately warded with ancient covenant magic that only the Blood King's direct line could maintain. Cale slipped through a barely perceptible hidden entrance on the south wall, the massive stone slab sealing silently behind them with a low, earth-shaking thud. The transition from the cold, damp exterior to the manor's interior was immediate and absolute. Inside, the air was dry, still and heavy with the scent of age, dust, and ozone, the residue of centuries of powerful, contained magic. The massive entrance hall was a cavern of black marble and towering skeletal columns, dimly lit by the scattered, perpetual glow of etheric siphons disguised as antique candelabras. He carried Lyra up the immense, sweeping staircase, his footfalls unnaturally silent on the worn, velvet runner. The interior was a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten libraries, perfect for both contemplation and defense. He moved towards the highest, most secured chamber, the Sentinel's room, which served as both his study and his ultimate, protected, inner sanctum. Lyra remained utterly still in his arms, the exhaustion of her ordeal finally claiming her. She was now in a deep, peaceful sleep, her small chest rising and falling rhythmically against his stone still one. Kyle placed her gently on the vast four-poster bed in the Sentinel's room, its dark wood draped in heavy velvet hangings that provided absolute darkness and protection. He covered her with a thick furs and silk coverlet, the layers a profound contrast to her thin, rain-soaked dress, which he would have to change soon. He stood over her for a long moment, watching the pure, profound innocence of her repose. The sight of her, small, fragile, yet immensely significant, stirred a quiet, fiercely protective tempest in his ancient soul. His gaze settled on the silver locket she still clutched. He gently pried it open, and with the absolute focus of a scholar, examined the tiny, obsidian-winged anchor. He knew what he had to do. He crossed the cavernous room to a massive, imposing desk of carved mahogany, its surface a scatter of ancient maps, astronomical charts, and journals bound in brittle leather. He sat, the heavy, high-backed chair creaking slightly under his weight, a sound that always felt like a minor sacrilege in the silence of his home. He reached into a hidden compartment and drew forth a small, black iron key, intricately carved with the sigil of the first house. With precise, ritualistic movements, he unlocked a journal bound in what looked like preserved white snakeskin, the chronicle of the Blood King's oath. Kyle opened it to the last blank page and, using a silver-tipped stylus and a vial of ink that was truly his own purified blood, began to write in the meticulous, archaic script of the High Coven. His words were not a personal entry, but a formal, legalistic, world-changing declaration. The language was formal, sparse, and utterly binding. I, Kyle Thas, scion of the first house, formerly blood king of the Ethel Morn covenant, having been called by the living vessel of the Veleda, Lyra, and having successfully defended the Anchor's Light against the aggression of the Noctruge, hereby invoke the right of the Sentinel's bond. Let the shame of my past be subsumed by the duty of the present. I take the child, Lyra, and the remainder of the Veleda line under the unbreakable, eternal, fiercely protective covenant of the Scion's guilt. Until her safety is absolute and the shadows are banished, I am her shield, her anchor, and her sword. This oath is witnessed by the cold of the marble, the silence of the dust, and the burden of the memory. The moment the stylus was lifted from the page, the blood ink glowed with a faint silver light before sinking permanently into the fibers of the page. The chronicle snapped shut with an audible click, and throughout the immense manor, the ancient wards, dormant for centuries, began to hum, igniting with a cold, powerful, silver-white radiance. The house was now unjust protected, it was sealed, an absolute, non-negotiable sanctuary. Kyle rose, the act of writing the oath a physical cleansing of his own internal malaise. The guilt remained, an eternal constant, but it was now channeled, focused, and weaponized. He glanced back at the sleeping girl, her presence a startling, luminous counterpoint to the darkness of his life. She was the one thing he could not fail. The siege was coming. He was ready. Chapter 6. With the Sentinel's bond formally invoked and the manor wards humming with newly awakened, formidable power, a measure of tense, unnatural quiet settled over Ethel Morin's heart. Kyle spent the next hours in an agonizingly precise sequence of preparations. He moved with a liquid, focused grace that spoke of centuries of military and magical discipline. In the adjacent armory, a room hidden behind a library shelf that slid away with a soft grind of ancient stone, he donned his formal, battle-ready gear, a tunic of black, reinforced leather that seemed to absorb all ambient light, and a pair of intricately crafted vambraces forged from a metal known only as shadow steel, designed to channel and contain his raw power without burning the wearer. He strapped the ancient, ceremonial, yet lethally sharp Ethel blade to his back, its polished black obsidian surface reflecting the scattered light of the etheric candelabras like frozen water. He was no longer the wandering recluse. He was Kyle Thas, the Blood King, prepared for war. He returned to the Sentinel's room, checking the security of Lyra for the third time in as many minutes. She was still asleep, a quiet, reassuring presence in the immense, silent chamber. He stood by the tall, Gothic window, his profile carved by the stark contrast of the room's dim light and the gray, rainy dawn finally breaking over the city. He could feel the Noctruge massing, a cold, psychic pressure building on the periphery of the manor's wards. They were cautious, knowing the cost of breaking a Blood King's active shield, but their hunger for the Veleda's power was a driving, irresistible force. He closed his eyes, his ancient mind reaching out, brushing the edges of the fortified city. He found what he sought, the subtle, powerful trace of another, not an enemy, but the lingering presence of Lyra's father. The man was immortal, yet he had possessed the conviction and knowledge to enact the emergency protocol to send his daughter to the single, most dangerous, yet most necessary protector, the exile. Kyle knew, with the sickening certainty of history, that the man was likely captured, his sacrifice a necessary precursor to this defense. Kyle opened his eyes, the silver flecks now prominent in the obsidian depths, burning with a renewed sense of purpose. He would not let that sacrifice be in vain. The sound of Lyra stirring pulled his attention from the gathering threat. She sat up slowly, looking small and lost in the center of the vast bed. Her eyes found his instantly, No hesitation, no residual fear, only the unwavering look of someone who had chosen her anchor. "They hurt my father," she stated, her voice quiet, almost flat, yet bearing the unbearable weight of her grief and knowledge. "They wanted the locket, the prophecy stone. He told me to run and find the cold hands." Kyle crossed to the bed, sinking to one knee beside her, bringing his terrifying height down to her level. His posture was open, non-threatening, fiercely intimate. "Your father is brave, Lyra, and wise. They do not have the locket," he said, gently touching the silver anchor at her throat. "And they do not have you. We are safe here. But they will come. They will try to break the walls, to break me." He was giving her the stark, brutal truth, not coddling her with comforting lies. The Veleda needed to be strong, not sheltered. Lyra met his gaze, her small hand, reaching out and resting lightly on his shadowed shadow steel vambrace. Her emerald eyes were pools of deep, unshakable conviction. "I know. My father said I had to be strong for the anchor. He said the anchor is strong, but he needs the light to truly see in the dark." Her words were an echo of the ancient prophecy, a profound understanding of their symbiotic bond. Kyle's heart, the stone he carried in his chest, ached with a strange, fierce blend of melancholy and quiet hope. Her faith was the shield he truly needed. "Then you will be my light, Lyra," Kyle promised, his voice a low, formal vow that echoed the covenant he had just written in his own blood. "And I will be your eternal shadow." He shifted his stance, his focus hardening. The Noctruge were pushing the western wall. He could feel the subtle psychic pressure, the dry, tearing sound of shadow magic attempting to breach the silvered wards. "The time for quiet is over, little light. The siege begins." He rose, a figure of dramatic, gothic power and fierce resolve, his hand resting on the hilt of the Ethel blade. He was ready to pay the price of his eternal guilt, not in suffering, but in blood, the only currency his enemies truly understood. The king was home. The siege would be long, high stakes, and devastatingly dramatic.